Hey everybody, I'm Todd and this is Sweet Tea Guitars. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel and welcome to my life. In the first episode, I went through and showed the process I used for gluing up the neck blank, which I've got right here. I went through and showed the process on gluing up the body blank, which is a multi-laminate. I've already shown you guys this fretboard. We'll see it again here in a moment when we pan down. I want a finished thickness in the center of this fretboard at 1/4 of an inch. And that's pretty standard throughout the guitar building world. They can be a little bit thinner on the sides based on which radius you use. On this guitar, I'm going to go with a 12-inch radius. That's my preferred radius, especially on a guitar that's looking to be played by a newcomer or by a person who concentrates on playing chords. I've got this fretboard super glue and masking tape down to the board, or to my tabletop. We need to run the plane over the top of this thing a few times to get some saw marks out of it because it came to me rough sawn. Then we will take it and sand it, make sure it's nice and ready to glue onto the neck blank when we're ready for that. So this is the last, pretty much the last piece of the prep work that I need to do before all our parts are ready for their next process. So let's get this done. Leave me some comments and let me know what you guys think about this build. Now, again, ebony is super hard wood, so I want to take this nice and slow. I've got the depth on my plane set pretty fine. I might back off of it a little. I've also got the chip breaker as close as I can possibly get it to the front of the cutting edge. Now, what I want to do is check the thickness on both sides. We're at about 8.5 millimeters. We're at about 8.5 millimeters. We're right at 9 and we're right at 8.5. So right here I'm a little high. So I'll take one more swipe of the plane and just run off that edge. Yeah, I can't really complain about that. So what I'm going to do now is take the old flatboard file. We'll take a few swipes across this thing. Get this nice and flat, sanded. We'll be able to see where any saw marks are left. So let's wipe this side down. This will give you guys a really good look at what this fretboard's going to look like. As soon as you put oil on ebony, the coloration kind of disappears a little. It's like getting a figured piece of ebony. I've been really excited before to see some figure in a piece of ebony, but as soon as you oil it, it turns black. You know, that's going to be just enough contrast to make this interesting. On top of that, this is the bottom. So let's wipe this side down, and I think we'll be able to see the color on this side a little better. It's a nice multicolored piece of ebony. You can kind of see that figure or that grain and that multicolor on this side. This is going to be a set neck glue in with a tenon that juts underneath the neck pickup with a bolt running behind the body that holds the tenon with a threaded metal insert. So I get really killer contact between that neck wood and the body wood. The heel will still be glued in like a regular set neck. I'm not really a fan of routing the fretboard to size before it gets glued onto the neck. What I really like to do, glue the fretboard on with about a 1/16 of overhang all the way around the rough cut neck blank, attach my template to it, route the whole thing at one time, or cut it out on the bandsaw, route the perimeter shape of that neck, then attach the fretboard and use the side of the neck as the template to route the fretboard. That's more than likely what I'm going to do on this guitar. I can pretty much set this aside for a while. We need to draw out some things on this neck blank. So I've already decided this is the back of my neck. This is the front. I'm hoping that I can preserve this black stripe in that Murado. I don't know that we'll be able to because some of this thickness will be coming off the back when I go to carve this neck. But we can at least lay this thing out. I guess the first thing we need to decide is, am I going to use a 3x3 or a 6-in-line headstock on this guitar? And I honestly believe we're going to use a 3x3. I just happen to have a satin chrome set of 3x3 tuners. They're hip shots. I think I'm going to get out the Sweet Tea headstock template. I need to modify that. Let me grab this template real quick so I've got an explanation tool to use while I talk to you guys about this. So that is the Sweet Tea original headstock design. I like it. I think it's cool. The one problem I have with this headstock template, or this headstock design in general, is the two top tuners are so close together that you cannot use a 90-degree tuner in these top two. I've got one of two options here. I can either spread these two apart and make this headstock a little wider, which, that's a consideration. I could do that. Or I can change this design a little bit and I can offset this side a little further up, leave this side where they are, and then that way there's nothing impeding the tab that comes off the tuner that the mounting screw goes in. I think what I would rather do is just kind of redesign the headstock. And we're going to do it right on the neck. Once I'm done with this neck, while it's still in its flat orientation, I will make another template from the neck that we're using now. I will probably elongate this by 13, 14 millimeters, not very much, just enough so it doesn't look odd and like I'm cramping up the space when we offset these tuners here. The first thing we need to do before we even go any further on this is we need to establish two things: a nut line and we need a center line. Let's measure and see how long this headstock template is. We're at 6 3/4 long. So I feel like if I elongate this up to about 7 1/4, so a 1/2 inch longer, just so we stay in proportion, I will bring this out about that same distance, 1/4 inch on each side from the center line. We'll make some marks on the neck blank and then we'll start drawing around and figuring out what we want to do with the shape right here, because I don't know if I'm going to leave that hook on there or not. We want to make a don't go any further limit line on this neck blank. Let's take our square and mark the ends of this where we can get a nice even cut. We'll know we can't go any further than that. And this will be our heel end, and I want to keep as much length on this neck as possible so I can incorporate my tenon idea. We want to come 7 1/4 inches from this top limit line, and we may come just a little bit further. So that is ultimately where we want our nut line. There's our nut line. So I'm going to get my 0.5 millimeter pencil, and we're going to mark the center line using this template as a reference. And sticking with this 0.5 millimeter pencil, let's get this laid out like we want it. I want to check just for a visual reference to make sure I'm happy with that as the center. And I am. That looks really good. So now we've got a center line. Let's grab our 25-inch fret slotting scale. And all I'm going to do is line this up on the center line, and I'm going to mark the end of the 22nd fret. All right, and we'll mark the 12th fret as well. So now at least we know that is our 22nd fret. We can come where I had that 23rd mark. We can call that the end of the fretboard and basically the end of the neck, because I want this fretboard flush. I don't want an overhang on this one. Let's go ahead and mark that 23rd fret where it would fall if we had a 23rd fret on this guitar. That is the end of the neck proper. We've got that much space, which let's measure that right at 3 1/8 inches for that tenon idea I talked about using. I want to use a little bit shorter neck pocket than what you would normally use. Most guitars have a 3-inch neck pocket. I want to do 2.5 on this with that 3 1/8 inch, or at least a 3-inch tenon. So that's going to give me 5.5 inches of contact with this body, held in by glue and by one M6 threaded metal insert with a stainless socket head bolt into a ferrule run through the back of this body. I want to lay this headstock down here, lined up on our center line, and let's just draw the shape just for a reference, and then we'll start playing with tuner placement. I want to widen this a little. We know we've got an upper limit of this area right here, so let's erase this. When we left off last night, I was working on this headstock shape. This is a PRS tuner layout, by the way, you guys. And I like that tuner layout because you get straighter string pull than you do on most 3x3 headstock. So I like that. I've chosen to offset because I don't want a big, wide, honky headstock on the top. I really don't like that. And even Gibsons, the Les Pauls, if you look at how steep the angle is once the string leaves the nut, I don't like that. I like straighter string pull. It does not have to be perfectly straight, but I don't want it splayed at like 35 degrees or anything like that. So here's what I've come up with. That is my headstock. And most of you guys know who build guitars. You guys know how hard it is to come up with a headstock design. I'm not knocking on Les Paul, you guys. I love Les Pauls. The only complaint I really have with a Les Paul is the back angle on the headstock. I think it's too great. I think it always has been. That's the reason why they're so easy to break. Secondly, I think the string pull, once the strings leave the nut, is at too great of an angle. Those are my two complaints. I'm going to make absolutely certain that I get that little curve in there, because if I don't, it's going to make the top look chunky, and I don't want that. I think that little curve right there on the end is going to be just enough to make this thing look elegant and flowing. So that's kind of my plan. I hope you guys like the headstock. I mean, I think you will once I get it cut. Let's get this body blank out real quick and figure out a couple of things we need to do here. This is 2 pieces of mahogany, a center strip of curly maple, which is just beautiful, fumed Etimo veneer, and then 2 plain white pieces of maple, 2 more pieces of Etimo veneer. I tried to utilize as much of this wood as I possibly could. I had a couple of pieces of mahogany that were already cut. Let's grab this PRS template. I like to shift that line a little bit. It doesn't have to be much. It just needs a little bit, because I'm after that forward momentum kind of a look. But it can be very subtle. And I like that. I like it subtle, honestly. So the first thing we need to do is let's establish a center line. I want my center line to be directly in the middle of this piece of maple that runs down the center. So let's find the center of that and let's mark it. The Incra is a great tool for this kind of thing. All right, there's my mark there. And let's move down here. There we go. 18-inch ruler here. And I'm going to use a 0.5 millimeter pencil for this, because I want these lines to be as accurate as I can get. So let's lay this PRS template down here. Now I want to bring this body down as far as I can so I can utilize as much of this wood as possible. I want to use the PRS belly. Again, I'm using the 0.5 millimeter pencil. It's just a tighter line. Let's line this up and get it on the center line. There we go. So all I want to do at this point is let's trace this off. And I'm not going to follow this design even. I just want to give myself a starting point. And then we will start to redraw this thing. Instead of this being round like that, I want to start right here on my center line And there is our forward momentum. Now I may change that a little. This point right here where this break at the top of this arc is a little bit further forward than this arc down here, which also adds to that forward momentum. So I'm happy with that location, but I still want a little bit more of a forward arc. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Just a little forward momentum, a little forward slant. I don't want to build the top of this thing like a Les Paul. Not exactly. Bring that out a little further. Bring this up as far as we can and drop that back down kind of like a telly would be. And I want to follow this downward slope right here into this curve on this cutaway. Okay, we're starting to get somewhere. I've been drawing around for about an hour. I want to show you guys this body shape, and I'm going to release this video before I cut this body out. I want to see what you guys think about this, and I mean, I may modify it a little bit. I will be going to the spindle sander with it. This is the body shape I'm thinking about using. It's got like it comes up to a point right here and then goes over. Then I got a single cutaway, kind of like a Les Paul would have, but I squared the end of this off over here. I widened this out wider than a Les Paul would be so it's more comfortable when you're in the upper registers of the neck. I think this is what I'm going to do right here. Here's my thing, you guys. So I want to maximize the volume inside this guitar, the open area where I carve these chambers in. I want that to be as deep and as hollow as it can be. So I want to maximize this body blank as much as I can without it looking all weird. I guess if I had to say whose guitar it looks the most like, and this was not intended, but I think it looks like my buddy Dave's guitar from Ewar Guitars. And I'm okay with that. Dave's a cool guy and he's a great builder. So if you guys hadn't seen his channel, go check out Ewar Guitars. Dave's an awesome builder. An absolute great guy, and he's got a complete build series on how to scratch build an electric guitar. He does a set neck carved top. The guitar turned out absolutely stunning. EWOR on YouTube. Anyway, I tried to keep in mind this little flowing shape that I've got on top of the headstock. This headstock's really growing on me. It's plain, but it's not boring. I mean, I just like it. I think it's got enough subtle nuance to be interesting. So we're going to find out. I'm really digging this. I'm excited about it. I think the doc's really going to like that shape too. I'm happy with that. So that's what we're going to do. Like I said, I may modify it slightly on the spindle sander, but that's progress and I'm happy with it. All right, you guys, when we left off last, which has been about a week ago, I was showing you guys the body shape I had come up with, the headstock shape I had come up with. We got all the blanks glued up with the exception of the top. I am now going to lay out the back angle on this headstock. I've already got my router set up, ready to do the truss rod slot on this neck, but I wanted to take you guys through the process on how I come up with the headstock back angle. It will be between 7 and 8 degrees. That's my target measurement. Well, let's talk about why I chose that. What I've come up with and why I use a 7 to 8 degree back angle on a headstock is this right here. This particular neck blank is 1.5 inches thick. Using a 2.5 inch or even a 2 inch thick piece of wood is an absolute huge waste of lumber. I have chosen to go with a 7 to 8 degree back angle on a headstock because you can get a neck blank out of 1.5 inches thick board. Sometimes waste is unavoidable, but if you can avoid it, you should. So if you guys will look right here on the side of this blank, I have got an angle drawn. Now the way I came up with this angle, I've got my nut line drawn right here. I've got my headstock sketched out. That's about a 7.5 degree back angle. I've already done this, but I thought this would be a really cool thing to show you guys so you would know how I did this. So on this side, I've got my nut line drawn right here. I've got that line beyond the end of my headstock drawn right here. And then I've got a line that intersects my nut line drawn at a 7.5 degree angle to meet this line at the end of the headstock or a little bit beyond that end. I used this protractor to get that angle, and all I did is set my protractor at 7.5 degrees. I put my 0 point on the nut line right there. I held this down, made sure I kept constant pressure on the end here, and then I drew a line with the pencil. So to keep us from having to match this on the other side using the protractor, what you can do is, we know we want to intersect at the nut line on our shallow side of the angle. On this deep edge, all you really have to do is take a ruler, measure from the edge of your blank down to where your back angle line crosses that line at the back beyond the headstock length. 24.5 millimeters exactly. That's how deep it is. So I can come over here. I've got my nut line right here, and I've got the end of my headstock on this end. All I have to do is take my ruler and measure 24.5 millimeters down. Then you can line a longer ruler, intersect your nut line, and then make that line connect on the line beyond the headstock right here. And then you just draw that in, and you've got a duplicate angle of the other side. We're set up to route our truss rod slot. So I've already got my marks made here. I've got this line beyond the 22nd fret line. That is the end of my truss rod route. I can carry it on out all the way to the end of the board if I want to. On this end, I like to stop at least that far before I get to the nut, because that way we don't run into any strength issues with the truss rod slot being routed over the volute or under the nut. I don't like to leave the route under the nut. I want the nut to contact solid wood all the way across. I just think that's a better building practice. I like to cut my truss rod slot in when I've still got a square side. That way I don't have to use any jigs, I don't have to do anything but clamp my neck blank to the table, set up the side guide on my router, make sure I'm centered both directions, and route the thing. Let's get this neck blank clamped down and let's route this truss rod channel. Let's check our initial fitment. So I just want to make sure we're deep enough, and we are, I can tell already. Slightly below the surface. I need to chisel this out. So we'll go for the 12 millimeter. It seems to be my go-to chisel. Okay, now we'll get our 3 millimeter chisel. Okay, I won't do any more work on this truss rod until we cut the neck shape out. Before we do anything else, or before we start cutting wood out of this, and you guys can see I've got a perfectly centered truss rod slot. That's dead centered down the middle of that Murado, which is exactly what I was hoping for. I want to lay out this neck a little bit differently than what I would normally do. So the fact that I'm not really planning on using a template for this build, I'm going to sand in the headstock on the spindle sander. We'll route the neck out on the router table using 2 flat strips of wood as our guide for our bearing. I want this guitar to be one of a kind, as I do most of my guitars. I already know I want a 43 millimeter nut width. But down on this end at the 22nd fret, instead of following a traditional measurement of 56, 56 and a half, or down to even 54 millimeters on some guitars, I am going to carry the width of the end of this fretboard up to 58 millimeters. I'm going to do a 25-degree fret bevel on this guitar. I'm going to do everything I can to make this guitar comfortable for a new player. So I've already got my 43 millimeter nut width established. Down on this end, I want to measure the distance between these two outside pieces of veneer that I've got here. We're looking like 27 and a half millimeters, right at 28 millimeters. On this line at the 22nd fret, I can put that on my 14 millimeter mark and have the ruler ultimately wind up in the center. Just like that. So we know that half of 58, 29. We're going to go over here. I'll flip the ruler around. Right at 14 millimeters on the outside edge. And then we're going to mark 29 millimeters. I'm using a 0.5 millimeter pencil for this. So what we'll do is draw this in, and I'm going to use a light hand on this. And I'm going to draw it all the way to the end so the taper follows that same progression. I'll flip it around. We'll do the same thing, just from the different side. So now let's measure on our 22nd fret line. I'm exactly at 58. So I do not want to mess with that. And it looks like 29 millimeters is dead in the center of my truss rod slot, visually at least. All right, so there's my 22nd fret line drawn in. We've got our width at the 22nd fret established at 58 millimeters. I'm going to go back with my 0.9 millimeter pencil, and we're going to darken up that line so it's not an issue when I go to cut this thing out. I really think that myrtle down the middle of that neck is just really beautiful. The myrtle's got like this silvery effect to it. It's really cool. What I will do is I will cut this about 2 millimeters, 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters outside this line that we just made. All the way around, I'll cut out my headstock shape, and we won't do any work on this tenon area until after I actually get the neck cut. So I know this neck blank's going to get cut off down in here because the tenon's not going to be as thick as this neck blank is. I need to make sure it falls below the bottom of the truss rod nut. So we'll take those measurements. I'll mark them on the side before we go doing any crazy cuts on this neck or whatever. All right, you guys, I'm going to wrap this video up right here. We've got the neck drawn out. You guys have already seen the body shape that I've chosen to go with on this guitar. That may change slightly as we go through this build. But I wanted to show you guys at least what my plan is for this neck. Get the headstock shape finalized. Get the neck blank laid out. Get the truss rod slot cut into this neck blank. We will build this neck before we route the neck pocket on the body blank. In the next video, we're going to cut this neck out. We're going to start to figure out what kind of shape we want on this neck. We'll get our back angle cut onto the headstock. We'll get that headstock plate glued up and ready to roll on this thing. We'll mark our tuners out. I'll figure this tenon deal out. We'll work a little on our fretboard and get it laid out at least. By the end of the next video, I will have decided whether or not I'm using binding on this guitar. I hope you guys will continue to come back to the channel. Thank you so much for all the comments you guys leave. I am so happy that there are so many of you guys into what I'm trying to do here on the channel. Leave me some more comments. Let me know if there's anything you want to see me do. If you got any questions, please feel free to ask me. And until episode 3 of the figure 8 build, you guys. Peace and love.